Okay, so good evening, everyone. I want to welcome Dan Sefick, CPA from CliftonLarsonAllen, our new auditors, and Eileen Cipriani, our business administrator, and Matt Domines, our finance director. We appreciate you coming in this evening, kind of give us an update as to where we stand with the 2022 audit, I guess it would be, right? Our hope and our goal is to try to meet that September 30th deadline, so hopefully we'll get an update and find out where you're at, but welcome aboard. We're glad to have you working with the city. So Eileen, Dan, take it away, or Matt.
Sure, well, we'll just let Dan take it away. They've been working with us for about a month now. We've made significant progress, so they're working with city staff, so we'll have Dan bring you up to speed.
All right, well, thank you, Eileen. We're excited to be here working with the city. This is our first year doing the audit, so we've been working together with the city a lot, gathering information, updating documentation, things of that nature. It's been going so far off to a really good start. So this is the first opportunity we've had to meet with the council. So this is just kind of a brief entrance conference that we like to do as part of our audits. So we have a brief presentation here. We'll get that started. So meet CLA, CliftonLarsonAllen. So we're the 8th largest firm in the U.S. We have about 9,000 employees. We have about 130 offices. This audit engagement will be staffed out of the Pittsburgh and Philadelphia offices. We have approximately 4,100 other governmental clients. We're one of the biggest CPA firms that do government work in the country. We have about 500 professionals who specialize just in state and local government. We do the most single audits of any firm in the country. Our CLA promise is to know you and to help you. And we aim to provide seamless services in every aspect of the audit. So we'll just kind of touch on kind of the overview of the presentation tonight and just go over the service plan. So we'll go over the responsibilities of council, management, and CLA as the independent auditors. We'll go over the timeline and some key dates. We'll do a brief discussion of fraud and other risks as part of the audit. And we can just touch on some other services if needed that we provide as your auditor. That includes guidance with new GASB standards or anything in regards to GASB 87 with the new lease standard as well. So this slide here, this kind of just lays out the scope of services. This is for fiscal year 22, 23, and 24. So at the end of our audit, we essentially issue 3 separate reports. The first one being the independent auditor's report, which is our opinion on the financial statements. This is where we lay out whether we feel that the financial information provided is accurate and materially correct. So this kind of lays out the information that management and council uses that kind of helps to provide reliance on that information. Our next report is the report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters based on an audit of financial statements performed in accordance with government auditing standards. So that's a long way of saying basically that we're testing controls over financial reporting to make sure that those numbers are accurate, and we're making sure that the city's in compliance with laws and other regulations. And then finally, the third and final report is what's known as the single audit. It's the report on compliance for each major federal program, as well as the report on internal control over compliance and the schedule of expenditures of federal rewards required by uniform guidance. So this is where we test certain programs based off of guidance that the federal government provides each year. So this year we're going to be testing both the American Rescue Plan funds as well as the home program. This next slide here, it kind of lays out the responsibilities of the 3 parties in this room. So the first one being the city of Scranton. So governance is responsible for oversight of the organization, strategic direction, transparent decision-making, accountability, including financial reporting, and to ensure the future mission of the city. Management's responsible for day-to-day decisions, internal controls and accounting policies, management decisions, fair presentation of the financial statements, and programs in place to prevent and detect fraud. And then moving on to CLA as the independent auditor, We're responsible for an opinion on the fair presentation of the financial statements, an audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, as well as government auditing standards, reasonable, not absolute assurance, an understanding of internal controls of the city, and finally, a risk-based audit approach. So we like to point out whenever we kind of get started, as your independent auditors, we work for governance, so we work for city council, and we work with management to accomplish the audit. So we like to get your input as part of the process as we're developing our audit plan and approach. So this is kind of a good forum. If there's any sort of concerns that you have as a council, to kind of bring those to our attention. So that could be, over an individual account, certain transactions, any sort of controls or processes that are in place. Any other concerns out there, whether it's a trend in the industry, any litigation or operational concerns that are out there, as well as if there are any suspicions of fraud or knowledge of fraud that anyone on council is aware of, this would be a good forum to bring that to our attention as well. So I'll pause there for a minute if you have any questions or things that you would like to discuss.
You were speaking just there about processes. Have you reviewed the issues with the previous auditors in providing a timely audit and gone over with the VA's office to address those issues with the process to ensure that we do get a timely audit?
So we were well aware of the issues whenever we came on board, and we felt it was important to establish an open line of communication right off the bat, and develop a timeline that we felt was reasonable, that everyone could hit and kind of stay on track to make sure everybody's accountable in meeting that deadline of September 30th. So we feel we have a good process in place to be able to accomplish that.
When looking at the processes that you've seen from the past and what you've probably reviewed coming in already, have you decided that there was an issue with the auditor, or was it an issue of preparing documents and getting it to the auditor?
I can't speak to the prior auditor and their approach to the audit. It's our approach that we try to take a proactive approach whenever we take on a new audit. So we like to establish that plan, early in the process, establish deadlines for both parties to make sure that we're all on track, and just have that, constant two-way street of communication. I think that's probably the most important thing. Just that we're communicating back and forth with Matthew, with the BA's office, and I feel like we've gotten off to a really good start in that aspect.
Just wanted to be right up front there with anything that's happened in the past to try to move it along a little bit quicker, and
absolutely,
for you to be on top of it as soon as you can.
Yep, and we fully intend to, as a firm of our size, it doesn't behoove us by any means to not make a deadline. So we try to keep everybody on schedule from our perspective as well, just because, frankly, it doesn't do us any favors to fall behind as well.
If I could just add for 1 second here, one of the issues that had occurred in the past was getting the audits in from the authorities. So we've actually taken a proactive approach, and we've reached out to those authorities already in writing, given them deadlines to submit their information. And actually, we received one yesterday, the day before, Parking Authority we have already. So, and we have timelines on the other two. So I think we're ahead of the game in that respect.
Yes, and those timelines were, well ahead of even August 30th. So that gives us plenty of time to perform our auditing procedures and do what we need to do to get the audit to a good place as well. So.
I know one of the things that we were told in the past is that the auditor waited until all of that information came in before they started their process. I mean, I don't know how true that is, but is that something that you'll be doing, or will you be continuing while you wait for some of those if they're delayed?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll continue with the work that can be done. There's a lot of work that can be done. We don't need to wait for everything to be in to start what we do. We've already started, a couple months ago, gathering the information that we need and starting to do our internal procedures. So that's just frankly not how we approach an audit.
Just on what Mr. Cipriani said about the reports, are those going to be coming to us annually still, or are we changing how often we're requesting those reports from those different authorities or entities?
No, they will stay the same annually. Previously, Matt and I took a proactive approach and reached out to them told them that we needed them and a deadline that we needed them by.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been in contact with them since early June, and I follow up with them every week or two to make sure what's going on. And like I said, we already got the parking authority, and the other ones are, I think one's due at the end of this month and one in August. So that, and then another one was GASB 75. We already got that done. That was a harbinger. That was out there until last, I think February, March, but that's completed already. So
Now that's, what's the cycle of the GASB 75? That's not every year, that's every few
every
years?
year, yeah. But next year we'll get it comes every year for the audit. We get an evaluation. But you're talking about the
HR piece of that.
right for that is being done now, and I think that'll be done by T.J. Anderson. I think next month. Yeah.
Okay. But that's something that's done yearly, or it's every other year?
Oh, they do it every year. That's different than the audit. Yeah, that's a different process. Yeah.
Okay.
But I know what you're talking about. That's where we get the basis for the MMO. Yeah.
Just as part of the audit process, we sat down with Matt and company as soon as we came on board and said, hey, what were some of the issues that held you up in the past? And we made, I could speak to Matt, has made those, very important thing of the process of getting ready for us to come on board was getting out in front of those potential issues to, mitigate any risks of the cities, not getting the information that they requested in a timely manner. So I think so far, I think it's worked very well since everything seems to be ahead of where it's been in the past.
We've had bi-weekly meetings with CLA since this started. Contract was executed, I think, 1st of June, and I think we started right after that. And we might have missed one around the holiday, but we're in constant communication, me and Dan, more than that, and now we have the information exchange portal going, where we can upload information to them. So it's not just me, it's Andy, it's Tom Rainey, it's Adam, uploading things constantly up to what they're requesting for information.
And that there, getting the, working with the firm, that was part of the findings from last time. Wasn't that part of the findings of the audit?
What's that?
That your offices are going to collaborate with the audit preparation firm to set dates throughout the year? So that was something that was set forth in the last audit to do, correct?
As a finding?
Yeah.
Is that in regard to the municipal authorities?
Not in regard to municipal authorities, just to meet periodically and get this on track and timely.
Yeah, I don't know if it was that, but yeah, but that was part of it. Maybe it was might have been a corrective action, but that's the way that I work. Mine's communication. I've always been that way in my whole career, and that's I've been with that since we got the proposal, and then it was accepted. And I've been in communication way before the contract was even signed. As Dan mentioned, they were doing work before they were even under contract. We were just giving them information and getting back and forth. But we've had a relationship over the past 4 or 5 months. We've been in contact basically every week just to get this done, because it's imperative. How the tardiness of it was. We want to get this done so it's done on time. And believe me, we're trying our hardest to do that this year. We really are. And Dan and his team has been a great cooperation. I upload something and it doesn't sit there. It's either accepted or a question comes back almost within hours. So information is getting up there, and they're looking at it. His staff is looking at it. And we're getting responses. And then once it gets accepted, it's cured, and then we go on to the next issue.
Dan, very nice. Hi, very nice to meet you. Your first slide was a very impressive report card, I have to say. I'm sitting here in this seat three and a half years, and every year we're promised the audit's going to be on time. And then when it isn't, it's a blame game. Everybody else is to blame. So we never know who's to blame. But I'm hopeful this year. But do you foresee any roadblocks right now that would prevent you or your team from completing this audit on time?
Frankly, I don't, as long as we continue to hit our deadlines that we've established throughout the planning of the audit. There's nothing really in here, that we don't have already kind of planned for. I don't, as long as those items continue to flow in as we discussed, I don't see any reason why the deadline should be missed this year.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. There's no further questions. I'm going to move on to the next slide.
So this next slide, it's just part of our required communication with council. Some of the required things that we have to discuss as part of the audit. Audit timing, we're going to get to that on the next slide, and we've kind of already talked about that. We've talked about our responsibility for internal controls over financial reporting, controls over compliance. We're required to plan and perform the audit so that it's free of material misstatement. Any significant matters that come up as part of the audit, we are required to communicate those to council immediately. So if anything comes up, we will be in touch with you. And finally, we're responsible for forming and expressing opinion, as we kind of talked about on an earlier slide. So this slide here kind of goes over our audit plan overview. So as we've kind of already touched on, we utilize a collaborative approach. We seek management input from both management and governance to develop an audit plan that focuses on areas of risk and areas of significance to the stakeholders of the city. So to kind of put that in layman's terms, our audit planning is ever evolving. It's a living and breathing plan. We adjust on the fly as to what we see and what comes up throughout the audit. We've already performed our preliminary procedures back in June after the contract was signed. July and August, we're doing our field work for the audit right now, and then we'll focus on reporting towards the end of August and into September. And as long as we continue to kind of meet the thresholds that we've established as far as the timeline goes, like we said, we don't foresee any issues as far as meeting the September 30th deadline this year. This slide here kind of details some of the risks that we identified as part of our planning process for the audit this year. You'll see kind of the blue area of the circle there for significant or fraud risk. Two of the major ones that we've identified is revenue recognition. That's for federal, state, and local sources, just to make sure those revenues are recorded in the correct accounting period. And also management override of controls. It's one thing to have a good control structure in place, but it's another for management to bypass those controls. So we've designed certain tests throughout our planning to test for that, to make sure that none of that's going on. The next area is the orange section there, or control risk. That's the risk that internal controls fail to prevent or detect a misstatement. We've designed some tests of controls to make sure that those are operating as they are intended to. If you slide on down to the yellowish part of the circle there for inherent risk, this is the risk from an audit perspective, just due to the nature of the account. So some areas we've identified there, investments, just making sure they're valued properly, pension and OPEB liabilities, as well as deferred inflows and outflows related to those. Since those are heavily reliant on estimates, we test the underlying data that's going into those estimates to make sure that it's reasonable. And finally, detection risk, the one in the blue in the corner there. It's the risk that audit procedures fail to detect a material misstatement. So kind of some things that we do to help mitigate that risk. Each year that we do the audit, we'll come up with new tests to avoid familiarity with the audit process. We will incorporate an element of unpredictability in our testing. And one thing that CLA does that's maybe a little bit different from the prior audit firm, we rely heavily on data analytics for large volumes of data. It gives us a little bit a different flavor of testing as to what you may have seen in the past. So that slide there kind of lays out, some of the major risks of the audit and kind of our approach to help mitigate those risks. Our responsibility related to fraud, as the independent auditors, we're responsible to conduct an audit that's in accordance with professional standards to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are, as a whole, are free from material misstatement, whether that's caused by error or fraud. So this kind of chart off to the side here that looks like a bullseye target. So anything that's above the yellow circle in the middle, that's the minimum threshold for reporting to governance. So we take a risk-based approach whenever we do our audit, an audit by materiality.
So that's the smallest materiality that we use as part of our audit. So anything that's above that, if we found an error or a misstatement, we would be required to report that to council. The next item, the orange item there, that's anything that's an individually significant item. So anything that's above that certain threshold, we look at that every single item in that transaction or group of transactions or account balance. So anything that's individually significant, we're going to look at that 100% and make sure that it's accurate and not misstated. And then finally, the cumulative threshold there is just what we call performance materiality. So anything that's above that materiality threshold, we use a sampling approach to look at those items. And then finally, if anyone has any questions after tonight, after you digest this or think about it, my contact information is here. Please feel free to call or email. Like I said, this is a collaborative approach, and that includes council as well.
Anyone on council have any questions for Dan, Eileen, or Matt?
No, my question's mostly focused around, have we taken a look at what was occurring in the past, and are we going to fix it moving forward? It seems that you should be on the right track. We'll soon see as September's coming quick.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know that's the number one goal this year is to make sure this audit's out in a timely manner.
Once the audit is complete, do you plan on returning to council at that point to give us an overview of your findings?
Certainly, yeah, we'd be happy to present the review of the audit as well as any findings that we have. That's something we can certainly do as well.
Yeah, I think that would be great, because it's one thing to read it, but to hear it from you and then to be able to ask questions at that point about what corrections or changes we need to make as a city, I think would be important, and for the public to hear that as well.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Great, thank you.
I noticed that you chose ARPA to be the area that you wanted to focus on this year. Is that happening with the other municipalities that you're working with? Obviously, that's a hot button item. There's millions and millions of dollars that are being expended throughout the country. So was that randomly chosen, or did you specifically, did the city ask you to focus on that area, or how was that decided?
So just to back up a little bit, so when we do the single audit testing, that's those regulations are put out by the federal government. So they have a specific method and approach as to how programs are selected. So given the fact it was over a certain dollar amount for 2022, we were required to test that by the federal regulations.
Well, so that was a requirement.
So that's a requirement. But to answer your question, yes, at almost every other municipality over the next couple of years, those funds are going to be heavily scrutinized.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else on council have any questions for Dan? If not, I want to thank you, all three of you, for coming in today. I'm thrilled to hear that things seem to be working out toward meeting our goal of having the audit delivered on time. And it sounds like the administration is working collaboratively with you to make that happen. So we're looking forward to receiving the audit on time, and looking forward to having you come in and give us a presentation and an overview of the findings. Thank you very much for coming. Oh, wait.
Yes, sorry, one more thing before you go. So while Ms. Cipriani is here, when looking at the corrective action plan, I know I asked a few weeks ago if a lot of these steps have occurred already. Could you just give us a brief update on those, as 6 of the 8 were due by June 30th?
Yes, and we did submit that already. Some of them were corrected right at the time the audit was completed. Some of them, one of the corrections I could talk about, so a lot of the grants, when they would come in, they'd be federal funding from various sources, and since certain departments applied for grants on their own, we've actually developed a methodology now that all the grants, no matter where they're applied for from, actually are tracked through the OECD office in our neighborly software. So that is one that we've corrected. I don't remember all the other findings off the top of my head.
Some of them are reaching out to the component units, we've done that.
That was probably the biggest one because of the timeliness issue with the grants. One of the other ones was tracking. So historically, especially in OECD, we would submit payroll by the quarter. So we'd reimburse the city by the quarter, and that would be problematic, especially at the end of the year. So it would be into the other year. So now we actually do it on a biweekly method, and it happens now when we do payroll.
One was sort of September, are you guys on time for the September 1st?
Yeah, and if you
Corrective
don't have
actions
those
or-
answers, we could resubmit them to Frank. I know we had sent them last week or the week before.
Yeah, I didn't know if it's something that you completed already. The one was for federal fire grants, and that has the September.
That's what I was
1st date.
talking about, how we've placed them in the neighborly software now.
All right, and then the other one was for federal grants, federal monies received for earmarked particular projects, tracking grant fund expenditures for grant audits. That
Right,
was
so
another
so
September
by
1st
putting them
date.
in that software, we're not tracking them in multiple places, so we could track them in one place so that we can report that out.
Okay, okay.
And I think that was a finding in many audits, so that's the resolution of an issue that I think that was caught in a lot of previous audits too. So that has after Eileen, the chief judge, and Sherry Frable putting that together.
Now, when you come in as a new firm, do you take a look at those findings? Or is that one of the first things you take a look at, or what's your process?
Yeah, so it's one of the first things that we look at, and per the regulations, we have to verify that those corrective actions either have been taken, and if they are not, it would unfortunately have to be a repeat finding. So, everything that we've seen up to this point, there's been processes or things have changed to remedy those findings.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody good? Thank you again for coming in this evening. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Mr. Sefick, you get that audit in on time, I will personally erect a statue to you in Courthouse Square. You realize that for over 20 years, the city's never gotten an audit in on